Can I ask you some serious questions?
Sure, you can go right in.
Have you been drinking?
You mean very lately?
You have had a history of alcoholism. Millions of people out there have also had
God.
the same.
Late-night shows hosted by Johnny Carson and David Letterman were supposed to be calm and funny, but some guests completely destroyed the script, doing outrageous stunts, shocking interviews, and things that left everyone in the studio frozen in disbelief.
I'm strong, you know, I'm strong. I can arm wrestle. Do you want to arm wrestle?
No.
I've been taking, I've taken part. These aren't mine. I can kick.
These moments became unforgettable classics of chaos. Who were the stars that went way too far? And what insane actions made viewers talk for decades? Join us as we relive the most unhinged, jaw-dropping, and absolutely wild moments from retro late-night shows that still make people gasp today. Guest 15. Madonna. Madonna walked onto the Late Show stage in 1994 and immediately started breaking rules. She was not there to play nice or follow the normal late-night script. From the very first moment, she seemed determined to make everyone uncomfortable. She began cursing almost right away. The control room had to bleep her over and over again. Every time Letterman tried to steer the conversation somewhere safer, she would push back harder. She made crude jokes and sexual comments that shocked the studio audience. People stopped laughing and started looking at each other nervously. Letterman tried to handle it with humor at first. He made jokes about her behavior and attempted to move things forward. But Madonna refused to cooperate. She mocked his questions and challenged his authority as host. It felt like she was testing how far she could go before someone stopped her. The worst part came when the interview was supposed to end. Madonna simply refused to leave. She stayed in her chair and kept talking. Letterman had to practically beg her to go. The audience that had cheered for her at the beginning now seemed confused and uncomfortable. The energy in the room had completely changed. By the time she finally left the stage, the show had gone off the rails completely. It became one of the most censored episodes in late-night television history. Producers counted over a dozen profanities that needed bleeping. But here is what made it truly unforgettable. Madonna seemed to enjoy every second of the chaos she created. Yet, her shocking appearance was nothing compared to what happened years earlier when a young bodybuilder sat down with Johnny Carson and said something so graphic that the entire studio went silent. Guest 14. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger appeared on The Tonight Show in the 1970s when he was still mainly known for bodybuilding. He was young, confident, and completely unaware of American television boundaries. What happened next stunned everyone watching. Carson asked Arnold about the feeling bodybuilders get when they work out. It seemed like a simple question, but Arnold's answer was shockingly graphic. He compared the physical sensation of pumping iron to intimate experiences. He used explicit language and described intimate feelings in disturbing detail. The studio audience went completely silent. People sat frozen in their seats. This was broadcast television in an era with strict standards. Nobody talked like this on family-friendly late-night shows. Carson's face showed pure panic. His eyes went wide and his smile became stiff and fake. Carson tried desperately to change the subject. He jumped to different topics and made nervous jokes. But the damage was already done. The censors were probably having heart attacks in the control room. This was live television with no delay button to save them. Arnold seemed genuinely confused about why everyone looked so uncomfortable. He came from European bodybuilding culture, where people spoke more openly about their bodies. He did not realize he had just crossed major American broadcast lines. Carson had to work incredibly hard to recover the show. He used every trick he knew to move past the moment and calm the audience down. His professionalism saved the segment from complete disaster. But that interview became legendary for all the wrong reasons. And the strangest part, Arnold went on to become one of the biggest movie stars in the world. And nobody talks about this moment anymore. But if Arnold's interview was awkward because of what he said, the next guest on Letterman's show took things even further with what he did, nearly kicking the host in the face on live television. Guest 13. Crispin Glover. Crispin Glover was never a normal Hollywood guest. Even before he walked onto David Letterman's stage, people knew him as strange, unpredictable, and deeply uncomfortable to watch. By the time he appeared on Late Night with David Letterman in the late 1980s, his reputation was already forming, but no one expected how far things would go. From the moment he sat down, the interview felt wrong. Glover was dressed oddly, wearing platform shoes and clothes that looked more like a costume than an outfit. He spoke slowly, refused to answer questions directly, and stared at Letterman in a way that made the audience uneasy. Letterman tried to joke and keep things light, but Glover did not play along. Instead of promoting his movie, Glover lectured the audience about strange ideas, spoke in riddles, and ignored the host's attempts to guide the conversation. The laughter in the studio slowly faded, replaced by confusion and nervous silence. Letterman, clearly uncomfortable, pushed back with sarcasm, which only made Glover more unpredictable. Then the interview crossed a line. Without warning, Glover stood up and began moving toward Letterman in a strange, aggressive way. He lifted his leg and nearly kicked the host in the face on live television. The audience gasped, unsure if it was a joke or a real attack. Letterman leaned back just in time, his smile gone completely. Security rushed in, and the segment ended abruptly. Glover was escorted off the stage, leaving the studio stunned. For a moment, no one knew what to say. Letterman tried to recover, but the energy of the show was broken. Viewers at home were left confused and shaken, wondering if they had just witnessed something dangerous. Later, Letterman banned Crispin Glover from ever returning to the show. It became one of the rare times a guest was completely cut off from late-night television. What made the moment so disturbing was not just the strange behavior, but how quickly comedy turned into real fear. If Crispin Glover made Letterman fear for his safety, the next guest would leave audiences wondering whether what they were watching was real or carefully planned madness. Guest 12. Zsa Zsa Gabor. From the moment she appeared on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Carson, she treated the interview less like television and more like a private party. She flirted openly with Carson, leaned close to him, and laughed loudly at her own jokes. Carson smiled and played along at first, knowing that pushing back would only make things worse. Then Zsa Zsa reached into her purse and pulled out a bikini, holding it up for the audience to see. Gasps filled the studio. She spoke freely about her love life, naming powerful men and sharing personal details that were never meant for live television. Carson tried to redirect the conversation, but she ignored his efforts completely. The audience was unsure how to react. Some laughed nervously, others sat in shock. Carson's calm charm was tested as he balanced politeness with quiet panic. In that era, television was tightly controlled, and Zsa Zsa's behavior felt dangerously close to crossing the line. What made the interview uncomfortable was not anger or chaos, but her complete refusal to respect boundaries. She was not trying to shock out of rage, she was enjoying the attention, and that made it harder to stop her. Carson knew the only way to survive the interview was to let it run its course. But while Zsa Zsa shocked with words and confidence, the next guest would bring raw anger, turning calm conversation into open confrontation. Guest 11. Reddy Foxx. Red Fox was a comedy legend, famous for his sharp tongue and fearless humor. But behind the scenes, he was already angry before his interview with Johnny Carson even began. A disagreement over smoking backstage set the mood, and once the cameras rolled, that anger followed him onto the stage. From the start, Foxx did not hide his frustration. His answers were short, sharp, and filled with attitude. Carson tried to keep the interview friendly, asking about Foxx's career and success, but Foxx refused to play along. Instead, he brought his anger directly into the conversation. He complained openly about how he had been treated backstage, breaking the unspoken rule that problems stay off camera. The audience grew quiet. Carson attempted to smooth things over with humor, but Foxx wasn't interested in jokes. Then, without warning, Foxx stood up. He announced that he was done, accused the show of disrespect, and walked off the stage live on air. Gasps rippled through the audience. Walkouts were almost unheard of, especially on Carson's show. Carson was left sitting alone, forced to react in real time. He calmly addressed the audience, making light of the situation, but the shock was obvious. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled, knowing the moment would be replayed for years. If Red Fox showed how anger could explode on live TV, the next guest would show how quiet collapse could be, just as painful to watch. Guest 10. Truman Capote. Truman Capote was a celebrated writer, known for his sharp wit and brilliant mind, but when he appeared on Johnny Carson's show, something was clearly wrong. From the moment he sat down, his speech was slow, his thoughts scattered, and his focus drifting. Carson began gently, asking simple questions, hoping to guide Capote into a comfortable rhythm. Capote responded, but his answers rambled, jumping from one thought to another without direction. The audience laughed at first, unsure if this was part of his personality. As the interview continued, it became clear this was not an act. Capote appeared impaired, struggling to form clear sentences. His words slurred, and long pauses filled the studio. Laughter faded into concern. Carson's expression changed. Instead of a host chasing entertainment, he became protective, carefully choosing his words, trying not to embarrass his guest. He shortened questions, offered gentle encouragement, and avoided pushing Capote further. The moment was painful to watch because it felt too real. This was not chaos or rebellion. It was a respected figure unraveling in front of millions. Carson eventually ended the segment early, something he rarely did, choosing compassion over content. Afterward, the interview was remembered not for shock, but for sadness. It became a reminder that late-night television could sometimes capture moments that were never meant to be public. But while Truman Capote's appearance was quietly heartbreaking, the next guest would turn disorder into comedy, flooding the stage with pure chaos. Guest 9. Dom DeLuise. Dom DeLuise was known as a loud, lovable comedian, famous for big laughs and bigger emotions. When he appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, audiences expected playful comedy and friendly chaos. But what happened that night went far beyond anything planned. At first, the mood was light and joyful. DeLuise joked with Carson, laughed loudly, and leaned fully into his larger-than-life personality. The audience loved it, and Carson smiled, allowing the energy to flow. But as the interview continued, the line between playful humor and total disorder slowly disappeared. DeLuise began grabbing food from the set, joking about eating on air, then tossing items around. What started as silly fun quickly escalated. Plates were lifted, food flew across the stage, and suddenly a full food fight broke out on live television. Sauce splashed, props were ruined, and Carson's suit was stained. The audience roared with laughter, but behind the scenes, producers panicked. This was not a rehearsed comedy, it was uncontrolled chaos. Carson tried to calm things down, but stopping DeLuise only made him louder and more dramatic. The host chose the only option left, letting the madness burn itself out. The interview became impossible to guide. Words no longer mattered. The stage looked like a disaster zone. When the segment finally ended, the damage was obvious, not just to the set, but to the carefully controlled image of late-night television. Dom DeLuise didn't arrive angry or rebellious. He simply let his energy explode without limits. If Dom DeLuise showed how laughter could destroy order, the next guest would leave audiences questioning whether what they were watching was comedy, violence, or something carefully planned. Guest 8. Andy Kaufman. When Andy Kaufman appeared on David Letterman's show, nothing about his appearance felt normal. Kaufman spoke strangely, avoided clear answers, and acted as if the interview itself was a joke only he understood. Letterman tried to guide the conversation, but Kaufman refused to follow. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if they were watching comedy or something uncomfortable. Things escalated when Kaufman brought professional wrestler Jerry Lawler into the segment. What followed shocked everyone. The conversation turned into an argument, then into physical violence. Lawler suddenly slapped Kaufman out of his chair, sending him crashing to the floor. The studio froze. Gasps filled the room. Viewers at home stared in disbelief. No one knew if this was real or staged. Letterman himself looked stunned, unsure whether to intervene or continue. Kaufman lay motionless for a moment, then returned, screaming and cursing, demanding revenge. The interview felt dangerous and real. Even after it ended, people argued about what they had seen. Some believed it was all performance art. Others were convinced it was genuine violence broadcast live. If Andy Kaufman shattered reality on Letterman's stage, the next guest would test Carson's patience by turning charm into uncontrollable disorder. Guest 7. Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, known for charm, confidence, and effortless cool. When he appeared on Johnny Carson's show, he was expected to be smooth, funny, and easy to manage. Instead, the interview slowly drifted into chaos. At first, everything felt relaxed. Reynolds joked with Carson, teased the audience, and leaned back comfortably. He seemed too confident, almost careless. As the interview went on, that confidence turned into disruption. Reynolds began interrupting Carson, joking over questions and treating the interview like a personal playground. He moved around the set, touched props, and ignored the rhythm of the show. Carson laughed along at first, but it became clear he was losing control. The interview lost focus. Stories went nowhere. Questions were never finished. The audience laughed, but the structure of the show began to fall apart. Carson attempted to regain order with calm humor, but Reynolds kept pushing. Unlike angry guests, Reynolds wasn't hostile. That made it harder to stop him. He wasn't breaking rules out of rage, he was simply enjoying the moment too much. By the end, the interview felt messy, unfocused, and drained of purpose. It became an example of how even likable stars could derail late-night television, not through rebellion, but through excess confidence. But while Burt Reynolds tested Carson's patience with charm, the next guest would turn the interview into a full power struggle, refusing to play by any rules at all. Guest 6. Truman Capote. Truman Capote walked onto the Tonight Show stage in the early 1980s, and immediately something felt wrong. The famous author who wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's was barely able to walk straight. His words came out slurred and confused. This was not going to be a normal interview. Carson knew Capote well from previous appearances. They had shared laughs and interesting conversations before. But tonight was completely different. Capote seemed lost and disconnected from reality. He struggled to answer even basic questions about his life and work. The author's responses made no sense. He would start talking about one thing and then trail off into nothing. Long pauses filled the air between attempts at conversation. Carson tried his best to help Capote along, asking simpler questions and offering gentle prompts. Nothing worked. The studio audience sat in uncomfortable silence. This was not funny or entertaining. It was sad and painful to watch. People could see that something was seriously wrong with this brilliant writer. He was falling apart right in front of millions of viewers. Carson made the difficult decision to cut the segment short. He thanked Capote politely and moved on to something else. It was an act of mercy rather than television production. The host knew that keeping Capote on stage would only humiliate him further. Later, people would talk about this interview as one of the saddest moments in late-night history. Capote was clearly struggling with substance abuse and personal demons. Seeing his public deterioration was heartbreaking for fans who loved his writing. The interview showed the darker side of celebrity culture. Sometimes the show must go on, but sometimes it should not. While Capote's appearance was tragic and real, another guest on Letterman's show would blur the line between reality and performance so completely that nobody knew what was actually happening. Guest 5. Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman in 1982 with professional wrestler Jerry Lawler. What followed became one of the most confusing and controversial moments in television history. Nobody could tell what was real and what was an act. Kaufman and Lawler had a public feud going. Kaufman had been wrestling women as part of his comedy act, and Lawler took offense to it. They had faced each other in the ring before, and tensions were supposedly high. But with Kaufman, nothing was ever simple or straightforward. The interview started awkwardly. Both men sat stiffly and traded insults. The atmosphere felt genuinely tense and uncomfortable. Letterman tried to moderate between them, but the situation kept escalating. Kaufman made provocative comments, and Lawler responded with anger. Then suddenly, Lawler stood up and slapped Kaufman hard across the face. The sound echoed through the studio. Kaufman fell out of his chair and onto the floor. The audience gasped in shock. This was live television, and violence had just erupted on stage. Kaufman got up slowly, cursing and screaming. He threw coffee at Lawler and stormed off the set. Letterman sat frozen, unsure what to do. Cameras kept rolling as chaos unfolded. Security guards rushed in to separate everyone. The show went to commercial break in complete disorder. For years afterward, people debated whether the slap was real or staged. Kaufman was famous for blurring performance and reality. He loved making audiences uncomfortable and questioning what they saw. Even Letterman claimed he did not know the truth. The incident became legendary because it captured what made Kaufman so unique and frustrating. He turned entertainment into something unsettling and strange. Viewers were left wondering if they had witnessed real violence or brilliant theater. The truth only came out years after Kaufman's death. It had all been planned. But while Kaufman's chaos was intentional performance art, the next guest on Carson's show created genuine disaster that nobody planned or wanted, turning a simple cooking segment into complete mayhem. Guest 4. Dom DeLuise. Dom DeLuise came on The Tonight Show in the 1970s to demonstrate cooking. He was a beloved comedian and actor known for being funny and energetic. Carson expected a fun, lighthearted segment. What he got instead was total destruction of his set. The cooking demonstration started normally enough. DeLuise prepared ingredients and talked about recipes, while Carson watched and joked around. The audience enjoyed seeing the playful interaction between the two entertainers. Everything seemed perfectly under control. Then DeLuise started getting more physical with the food. He began tossing ingredients around and making messes. Carson laughed along, thinking it was part of the bit. But DeLuise kept escalating. He threw more food and moved faster around the kitchen area. Before anyone realized what was happening, a full food fight had erupted on live television. DeLuise threw flour, eggs, and various ingredients at Carson. Carson fought back by grabbing whatever food he could reach. Cream pies flew through the air. Sauces splattered everywhere. The studio audience roared with laughter at first. This was the kind of slapstick comedy people loved. But backstage, producers were panicking. The set was being destroyed. Expensive equipment was getting covered in food. Carson's expensive suit was completely ruined. The segment went on much longer than anyone intended. DeLuise seemed unstoppable in his enthusiasm for creating chaos. Carson tried to regain control multiple times, but kept getting hit with more food. The desk, the chairs, the floor, everything was covered in mess. When it finally ended, the cleanup took hours. The show had to scramble to reorganize for the remaining segments. Carson had to change clothes completely. Crew members spent the entire commercial break wiping down cameras and furniture. DeLuise apologized afterward, but the damage was done. The segment became famous for being hilarious and disastrous at the same time. It proved that even planned comedy bits could spiral completely out of control. Sometimes the biggest disasters on late-night television were not planned at all, like when Robert Blake sat down for an interview that never really happened because chaos walked onto the stage uninvited. Guest 3. Madonna on Johnny Carson. Madonna appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson in the 1980s when she was just becoming a major star. She had already built a reputation for pushing boundaries and making people uncomfortable. Carson thought he could handle her with his years of experience. He was wrong. From the moment she sat down, Madonna started making suggestive comments. She leaned in close to Carson and touched his arm repeatedly. Her answers to his questions were filled with sexual innuendo. Carson smiled nervously and tried to redirect the conversation to safer topics. But Madonna refused to follow his lead. Every question became an opportunity for her to say something shocking. She talked about her personal life in graphic detail. She made jokes that crossed the line for family television. The censors worked overtime bleeping out inappropriate words. Carson's discomfort became increasingly obvious. His face turned red several times during the interview. He pulled away when she got too close physically. His usual smooth charm disappeared as he struggled to maintain control of his own show. The audience reaction was mixed. Some people laughed at the outrageous behavior. Others sat in awkward silence, unsure how to respond. This was The Tonight Show, a program families watched together. Madonna was treating it like a provocative music video. Multiple comments had to be censored before the show aired. Producers debated cutting entire sections of the interview. They worried about complaints from viewers and problems with network standards. The segment became a battle between host and guest. Carson ended the interview earlier than scheduled. He thanked Madonna politely but firmly and moved on quickly. After she left, he made a joke to the audience about needing a cold shower. Everyone laughed with relief that the uncomfortable moment had passed. The interview showed that even the king of late-night television could be thrown off balance by a guest determined to cause chaos. Yet, controlled chaos was one thing, but when Dom DeLuise returned to Carson's show for a cooking segment, nobody expected the complete destruction that followed. Guest 2, Dom DeLuise. Dom DeLuise arrived on The Tonight Show stage ready to cook something special for Johnny Carson and the audience. The comedian and chef had done cooking segments before with great success. Everyone expected laughs and delicious food. Instead, they got one of the messiest disasters in late-night history. DeLuise set up his ingredients at the desk while Carson watched with amusement. The segment began innocently with discussions about recipes and cooking techniques. DeLuise demonstrated how to prepare various dishes while making jokes. The audience enjoyed his enthusiastic personality and Carson's reactions. Then something shifted. DeLuise started getting more animated with the food. He tossed an ingredient playfully at Carson. Carson laughed and threw something back. What began as gentle teasing quickly escalated into something much bigger and messier. Suddenly, food was flying everywhere. Eggs cracked and splattered across the desk. Flour filled the air like snow. Sauces dripped from furniture and clothing. DeLuise grabbed handfuls of ingredients and launched them at Carson, who retaliated with whatever he could reach. The carefully planned cooking demonstration had turned into total war. The audience screamed with laughter as the chaos intensified. But backstage, producers watched in horror. Expensive equipment was getting destroyed. The set looked like a disaster zone. Carson's suit was completely ruined beyond saving. Cameras were covered in food splatter. DeLuise showed no signs of stopping. He seemed possessed by the joy of creating mayhem. Carson tried multiple times to end the segment, but each attempt resulted in more food being thrown. The bit had taken on a life of its own. When it finally ended, crew members faced hours of cleanup. The show struggled to continue with everything covered in food. DeLuise apologized between fits of laughter, but the damage was spectacular. The segment became legendary for being hilarious and catastrophic in equal measure. But sometimes interviews failed not because of what the guest did, but because they never really happened at all, like when Robert Blake sat down only to be completely overshadowed. Guest 1. Robert Blake. Robert Blake walked onto The Tonight Show ready for a normal interview with Johnny Carson. The actor had stories to share and jokes to tell. He settled into the guest chair with a smile, ready to entertain millions of viewers. Then Don Rickles destroyed everything. Rickles was performing in Las Vegas and happened to be watching the show from backstage. He decided spontaneously to crash the interview. Without asking permission or being invited, he stormed onto the set while Blake was trying to answer Carson's first question. The audience erupted in surprise and laughter. Rickles was famous for his insult comedy and unpredictable behavior. Carson knew immediately that his planned interview was over. Blake sat frozen, unsure what to do as chaos erupted around him. Rickles began insulting everyone in sight. He made fun of Carson's suit and haircut. He mocked the set decoration and the band. He grabbed props from the desk and waved them around wildly. Carson tried to regain control, but Rickles was unstoppable when he got going. Blake attempted several times to speak. Each time he opened his mouth, Rickles would interrupt with another joke or insult. The actor eventually gave up and just sat there watching the madness unfold. His interview had been completely hijacked. Carson made a decision to let it happen. He knew fighting Rickles would only make things worse and less funny, so he allowed the legendary comedian to take over his show completely. Blake became a silent observer to his own interview. The segment went down in history, but not for anything Blake said or did. He barely spoke 5 sentences during the entire appearance. People remember it as the night Rickles crashed The Tonight Show, not as a Robert Blake interview. Blake later joked that he showed up for work, but never actually worked. His interview existed only on paper, destroyed by pure comedic chaos before it could really begin. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.